Hi, this is Paul. Friday, we did a live stream with Kale and Bethel and talked about They Flew, talked about Third Man. It's a good conversation, I thought. I thought it went very well. Um, One of the things that I think about in all of this is, of course, I'll be talking to John Vervaeke coming up, his whole Hermes thing. I just finished recording a video where I touched on his conversation with Kurt J. Mungle. I then after I finished that video, was able to watch more of it and saw, some of the key parts at the end. Basically, very much agreeing with what he said in the beginning in terms of substance ontology and some of those things. But thinking about how strange a time we are living in and how wild and weird things are going to get, I very much want to keep. I very much want to keep working on um, the Jordan Peterson video with Russell Brand. I think that continues to be an important conversation. Somebody left a comment about Jerry Marzinski and his channel, and so I went to that channel and I've looked at a couple of his things a little bit. Some wild stories there. Part of what I see is a lot of overreach. I watched Jonathan Peugeot and Father Stephen Domick have this conversation, and there are some places in this that Jonathan again continues to talk about sort of where the conversation has landed.
Word that we use in the West, or the noose, or the or yeah.
And um, that's dangerous and exciting and interesting. And I don't know, talk about that a little bit. Like, what does it mean to be permeable beings in the midst of a crisis of meaning? Or like, Charles Till, I want to talk about this question of the age of authenticity that he describes
Yeah.
too in his stuff. Like it seems like everyone's heading for try to be as authentic as possible. What's the saying? You do you,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that all about like whatever it is you are, just go ahead and be that? Um, but nobody
Yeah, but
seems to
they
know who they are.
it's not a yeah, it's not a real authenticity. It's a because we live in a it's almost like an inverted authenticity, because the you do you is actually usually means something like whatever whim you have, you act on that whim. It's like that's not you. You're not your
Yeah.
whim, you're not your desires, you're not your thoughts. And that's what traditional, not just orthodoxy, but almost every single traditional religion will tell you that. It's like, you're not that feeling, you're not your thought that.
So in the John Vervaeke video, I talked about you and your profile, talked about authenticity and sincerity, and then, of course, prophilicity.
You are There's something behind that. There's intelligence, like that would be the word that we use in the West, or the nous, or there's something behind which is beyond all this noise, you could say. It's not that the noise doesn't participate in you, it is a manifestation of you, but it's not you're not that. And uh so we have this problem right now, which is that people.
Now, of course, with a big end back to that onion metaphor, without a soul, all you are the layers of the onion. There's nothing more. And I think, again, Christians assert that. Now to get at, again, we're sort of questioning substance ontology, and in some ways, the soul was sort of relied upon to be the substance upon which all of the formation and experiences would be.
People are looking for spirituality, but they confuse all the levels. It's like we just lost the wisdom. And so they confuse like some experience or some feeling or whatever. I mean, we've been misled for so long, even all these German theologians who talked about religious feeling, like as if that's what religion is about. The, and so we're kind of messed up, because so it's like the veil is being torn, or the veil is being opened up again, and all of a sudden people are able to see or to participate in these spiritual influences, but we've lost the normal hierarchy that the ancient world used to be based on. And so no, people don't know how to differentiate a demon from an angel. They don't know how to differentiate something which is can still cause a kind of ecstasy, like you can fall into a trance if you go to a rave, like, and you can kind of enter into a spirit and then completely lose yourself in a rave, but that's not the equivalent of taking communion. It's not the equivalent of doing the Jesus prayer, although both can lead to types of ecstatic of ecstasies, and so anyways, so this is the issue that we
Yeah.
have. And as we one of the things that's making us see, I think, is also the political radicalization is making us see the spirits, like, because we can see it in others more easily. You
Yeah.
can notice someone, right? You all of a sudden someone talks to you and you're like, oh, Matthew just disappeared. Now I'm talking to like some political agency that is running through them. They've lost and they're just running a program. And it's like, huh, interesting. And then you realize, oh, well, that actually, I probably have some of those. And then you start to see them appear in the world, like these programs that are running, like these kids that are becoming, furries or whatever, like become thinking they're animals. And
Okay, so you see someone, and then there's this program that is running. So you can find a lot of videos of conversations with often either Pentecostal, Roman Catholic, or Orthodox exorcists. And you can find exorcists working on in different areas of the church. Now, given what Jonathan just said about, I was just talking to someone and bang, the frame switched political, and now it's like I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to the talking points that came out of Fox or MSNBC or whatever thing. It's like the program switched in, and
Go. There were places. My first time I saw somebody that I knew was possessed was in Lourdes. It was a young woman waiting to go into the baths, and when she got close enough, the demon was like, "I'm not having this," and she went ballistic. And I was about 20 yards back in line, and I remember when she locked eyes with me, I could see that was not her. I was looking into the eyes of something that was horribly evil, and I literally hid behind one of the big like stone pillars because I was afraid of that thing looking at me. So even in these holy places, I've been on the mountain, climbing the mountain in Medjugorje, and people start manifesting. And see, maybe it's because I know what I'm looking at, but I see this more than just people coming into my office.
Mm.
so forget which live stream it was, but one of you was really insisting. It might have been, I don't remember who it was, but one of you was really insisting on, okay, well, which spirit, which spiritual thing, because part of what we're having right now is sort of this coming together of, well, here you have a Roman Catholic priest talking about a very specific thing that is extraordinary and fairly rare. And you have Jonathan talking about something that is very common. In fact, as Jonathan said, well, we all sort of run these programs. And I think Jonathan is right that in some ways the veil is being taken down. And part of the reason the veil is being taken down, I think, is because of all of these Turing test passing AIs and human manifestations where we don't know what we're talking to. And that sort of leads us to say, well, we never knew what we were talking to. I think and we never were quite sure what was talking through us. And I think one of the real services that C.S. Lewis gave with the Screw Tape Letters is that it helped, and, to a degree also with that hideous strength, it helped inform our imagination of what we think about when we use these words. And I think this is going to be with sort of if there's a recession of modernity, there's part of what we're seeing is the rapid recession of the buffered self. I think that's a huge part of what we're seeing. We're seeing the rapid recession of the buffered self. And I think that's going to mean dealing with all sorts of things. A little bit more of this video.
Stuff. It's like you watch it and it's like, oh, there's this spirit that's just running through society and influencing people into all kinds of weird behaviors that are completely irrational and weird. And so we can actually see it because of the breakdown.
Yeah. I think that, like, and thinking about that phrase, you do you, right? Like, what does that mean? That means construct your own story,
Yeah.
construct your own definition of who you are, and then live that. But I think that what happens is,
and again, this gets back into authenticity and sincerity, because this Marxist who comes up with this language of sincerity and calls us basically a multi-layered onion, I read about that in You and Your Profile in the video I did about John Vervaeke. He says there's no thing there. And, well, the authenticity people say, well, there's a secret, sacred self. Of course, Christians, we have our identity in heaven. And that sort of gets at what Luke always talks about in terms of the Whitestone name. But, fix your life on things above, not on earthly things. Your life is in Christ in heaven. This is your Christian identity. I don't know much about Father Dominic, but I like his authenticity. What do I mean by that? Now that I've used these words and I've spoiled them, he seems very honest and very approachable, and he isn't talking in a funny voice like I hear some people with black robes. They seem to talk in a funny voice, and in Dutch we called that a preektoon. It was kind of the preacher's tone. And then he shares this, which I really appreciated.
when people try to do that, they discover that they're not actually as good a storyteller as they thought they were.
Yeah.
And
But they also they don't realize they're slaves. They end up being slaves
Right.
to some stupid thing.
right.
It's like
right.
who is the think about like when we were younger, like our version of You Do You. It's like you're a grunge punk type person. And
Sure,
then you have
yeah.
a uniform. I can see you from a mile away. It's like you're goth or you're super like you're really marginal and original. It's like, why are you wearing a uniform then? And
Yes.
so you see the same thing now. Like people are like, oh, I just be myself, and then they become like you're like, oh, I can see you. Like you've been completely taken over by a spirit.
Yeah. There was I remember there was I can't remember which band it was now. I think they were in the 90s, and they had this phrase, I want to be different, just like all the different people.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the thing is like when people attempt to authentically construct their own identity and be themselves, they end up being anything but themselves.
That's right.
There's some other thing. And so there's this I don't know, it's a fragment. And the problem is, as you use the word whim, right? The problem is my whims today and my whims tomorrow are related to each other, but they're going to be different tomorrow. I'm going to feel differently about who I am and what my life is tomorrow than I do today. I'm going to feel differently about it tonight.
Yeah.
When I'm tired and at the end of my rope, I'm going to start thinking about my life, my relationships and whatever in a different light than I think about them when I've just had a cup of coffee and I'm feeling pretty good. And so then the problem is
The spirit of caffeine.
that when you have no kind of story that we're all part of, then I tend to believe whatever goes through my head. One thing I often say to people in confession is,
And you could see almost sort of the warring spirits of the spirit of a culture of sincerity and a culture of authenticity, because I noticed this. So then you ask the question of integrity, because integrity, both are trying to manage integrity. Integrity is whether it's the onion of sincerity or the peach of authenticity. Again, boy, maybe I'll have to put a little clip in here of that. Maybe I'll just do it right here. Zuckerberg's sweeping claim you have one identity has little to do with historical, sociological, or psychological evidence and is flatly contradicted by social media practices. Identities are fragile and dynamic patchworks. The common and, as in Zuckerberg's case, often unquestioned idea that everyone has a single underlying self that ought to be identified and publicly expressed It's authenticity. In the form of a coherent individuality, in order to have integrity, rose to prominence only rather recently in the modern age of authenticity. The semantics of this age guide the semantics of Facebook's ethos. Prior to this age, however, identity was often understood differently. It was acknowledged that people had to assume numerous roles in society, and thus integrity did not lie in presenting the very same true persona all the time. Rather, it rested in carrying out one's different roles properly and virtuously, as well as in fulfilling commitments to those roles to the extent of truly identifying with them. This was the integrity of sincerity. I am going to, in my realm as family, be a father. In my realm as church, be a pastor. In the realm of YouTube, be a YouTuber? Or whatever it is I am. The late American Confucian philosopher Henry Rosemont Jr. used the metaphor of peaches and onions to illustrate the difference between viewing people as a core self versus being composed of social roles and relationships. Now again, some of you listening to this are going to be immediately afraid of fragmentation. Social roles and relationships. Yes, but you don't treat your boss like you treat your baby. Lie down, bucko, I'm changing your diaper. No. People may be seen as peaches, an external skin that is public, the fruit itself, which is our body, as well as our personality and history, and then there is a peach pit, our self, or our secret sacred self, which endures, not change from day to day, and is quite literally the seed of future life, biological and mental. But think instead of an onion. I peel off successive layers, first son, then husband, father, grandfather, mother, maiden, mother, matriarch. There's something that's happening here. Now, there's got to be integrity. It's all still onion. Oops. Peeling away the layers of friends, students, teachers, colleagues, neighbors, etc. And what is left is there's no more layers, nothing at all. Now, again, there's going to have Christian implications here. Luke is going to mention his Whitestone name. You were seen from the foundations of the earth. Christians are going to come in with a soul. But then again, even though Christians are still using these terms and working these terms, I'm not in any way saying that these terms are obsolete. But our understanding of these terms has continued to develop. I'll say it that way. Never shy about his predilections, Rosemont pounced on anyone who adopted for a peach view of themselves. If you claim to have a core immutable self, why is it that any description of that self can be readily explained through your social interactions? And of course, this is sort of the irony that you find with teenagers. They're all being individuals in all the same way. And the most amazing thing that I've seen in these current days, where the sort of the reign of the authentic secret sacred self, number one, keeps changing, and Pro-Felicity is just scrambling that. And now we have not so much the pilgrim, but the tourist, or rather the chameleon, who, this is my identity now, this is my identity now, this is my identity now. But then you have the question of what is the thread through them? And they say, well, the secret sacred self. Well, so when you were this thing, were you failing to express that secret sacred self? It's not working very well. And you can very quickly see that, well, we are going to have some opponent processing between these two perspectives of culture and society, and identity and integrity. What meaning could your life possibly have outside those roles and relationships? And this, again, is where we start connecting into the non-substance ontology, where it's relationality. And then we're going to have the question of, well, what is holding all of these relationships together? Do we not live our lives as abstract individuals with accidental relationship, but become who we are through bonds with others? We live as fathers, daughters, brothers, teachers, and so forth. We are an aggregate of various dynamic personal connections. When they change, we change. Even a small variant can unsettle us, while big changes can completely alter our identity. A family member dies and our life is transformed. We get married or have children and our world dramatically shifts. Rosemont paraphrases David Hume, replacing perception with role, to make a point. For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular role or other of father or son or friend or neighbor or teacher or student. I never catch myself at any time apart from a role, and never can observe anything except the viewpoint of roles. And again, people who go out to find themselves, what are they doing? They have something that they are checking against other things. And that what they're often doing is sort of chameleon-like. Oh, I was a this thing and now I'm a Christian. So, in fact, the Apostle Paul says, basically uses the analogy of putting on Christ as if you're putting on a garment. And so, in fact, there are things that are changing. And the crisis, of course, is, well, if there's no line through, maybe I lose myself. So there's sort of a doubling down on authenticity. The self, person, or I, simply the complex or amalgam of various roles and relationships. This is what sincerity as a method of achieving identity refers to, recognizing that social role encumbrances make encumbrances. It's often because this is where you bump into the real, the more real than you, because now this is people who talk about an objective desk that I have my foot on, an objective lens cap that I have in front of me. With enough velocity, this could kill me. With enough velocity. Right now, not so much. They make us who we are. The position Rosemont advocated is clearly radical. For him, the social roles and relationships did not simply contribute to a sense of oneself or identity. They weren't sort of the varnish on the peach pit. They consisted of it entirely. But now, okay, this is where you're going to bump into, well, you can go back to John Vervaeke talking to Sam about AI, or is there something else that's in us that the machines can't capture? Is there a there beneath it all? And so you can see why ideas of the peach pit arise. He was a leftist communitarian who hoped to achieve social justice and overcome the evils of capitalism by promoting a fundamentally role-based conception of identity, cleansed of its oppressive aspects and adapted to contemporary context. Oh, you mean this disciple of sincerity was a communist? Yeah, he was. Today, people are likely to disagree with such an extremist conception. Authenticity, with its emphasis on creating or finding one's individual self, has become increasingly important over the past few hundred years. Now, part of that could always be because of the scrambling. Because once all of these other roles are no longer assured by the social context that you're in, people can't even find mates. They're never going to be a father or a mother. So then what are they? Merely an employee, a cog in the capitalist wheel? They want to be authenticity. They want to be Jack Kerouac and go off. They want to be with Huck Finn and light out for the territory. In pre-modern times, the onion of personhood could easily be regarded as convincing. From a somewhat idealized reconstruction of the pre-modern role of Confucianism, Rosemont drew inspiration for his attempt to root out the hyper-individualism he perceived to be a source of most socio-political problems in the modern world. But again, now, of course, he's comparing. He's got some utopian vision or eschatological vision. He's saying, well, we want to get there, so let's get rid of this peach and pit thing, and maybe if people can be onions, we can construct them wholly by the systems. And a whole bunch of you who have developed an allergic reaction to wokeness will be like, well, there it is. I am nothing. And so on one hand, when I've been talking about authenticity and sincerity, you've been like, yes, traditional roles, we inherit them. That's who we really are. But once you sort of say that's who we really are, you're sort of sounding like authenticity with the peach pit. This is tricky stuff. The onion of sincerity or the peach of authenticity, you've got to know there's got to be a you there. When you look at, say, a biblical story like the Gadarene demoniac legion, the person is nearly lost. And when we look at questions of, extreme questions of possession, the person is nearly lost. And so then it comes into questions of, okay, is the person gone? And of course, C.S. Lewis plays with that in The Great Divorce, where Lewis says, well, they start out complaining and they just keep complaining and they complain. And then eventually, finally, all there's left is a grumble. That's all the person has been reduced to. And of course, Lewis is, he's got George MacDonald in his ear. He's trying to be a faithful Anglican. He's trying to figure out, okay. And Lewis is not finally a universalist or someone who believes in ultimate reconciliation. Lewis sees people destroy themselves all the way down to nothing.
I'll say, look, don't believe everything you think.
That's right.
I
saw that on a bumper sticker the day before I saw this video for the first time. It was like last week, towards the end of the week, I saw this bumper sticker. It said, don't believe everything you think. And I thought, oh, that's really good. And then I heard him say it. I thought, I wonder if the bumper sticker, I don't know. Now, to give you a sense just how weird this is going to get, and I don't know anything about this guy's channel. I don't know anything about the faith life of these people, but here this Lynn Monette was a former RN, and she talks about, she's, again, another one of these people like Bethel was talking about, this Irish woman who claims she sees angels all over the place. Well, this woman sees demons, and apparently there were attachments on a particular woman that came into the mental health clinic, and she was able to sort of pry the attachments off. And I'm sure some of you out there know who these people are and what they're talking about, but she was able to pry these demonic attachments off. And again, if you hang around Pentecostal circles, and I was around for the 1980s for Frank Peretti and This Present Darkness. I've mentioned that book before. But again, part of what's different now is in the 80s, the demon scares were much more about, again, substance ontology. And what we're going to see now is we're going to recognize that, first of all, there are bodies at various levels, and those bodies get attached in different ways, and those bodies get directed in different ways. And not only, like Jonathan and Father Dominic were talking about, do I get distracted, but whole bodies get distracted. Great Substack here about the state of the culture. President's State of the Union address speeches every year, but it's a snooze. Now he does a State of the Culture speech, and he first starts talking about arts and entertainment, and they go in two directions. And then, well, now it looks a little bit different. You've got sort of entertainment eating arts. Maybe creative people think there are only two options, one for them and one for their audience. But they're dead wrong. Maybe it's smarter to view the creative economy like a food chain. If you're an artist or striving to become one, your reality looks like this. Entertainment, eating arts. Until recently, the entertainment industry had been on a growth tear, so much that anything artsy or indie or alternative got squeezed as a cultural damage. Even this disturbing picture isn't disturbing enough. That's because it misses the single biggest change happening right now. We've witnessing the birth of post-entertainment culture, and it won't help the arts. In fact, it won't help society at all. And then big movie franchises. Disney is in a state of crisis. Paramount just laid off 800 employees. Universal is releasing movies to streaming after 3 weeks in the theater. Warner Brothers actually makes more money canceling films. Estimated number of U.S. scripted original series per year down. Music may be in the worst shape of all. I'm Just consider Sony's huge move a few days ago, investing in Michael Jackson's song catalog, a valuation of $1.2 billion. No label would invest even a fraction of that amount in launching new artists. In 2024, musicians are actually worth more old than young, dead than alive. But it gets worse. A better model for 2024 is distraction entertainment art. The fastest growing sector of the culture economy is distraction, or call it scrolling or swiping or wasting time. It's a huge business. It will be bigger than all the arts and entertainment industry combined. Everything is getting turned into TikTok. And then he gets into the dopamine cycle here, the dopamine loop. Because what Silicon Valley realized is that the tobacco and alcohol people had even a better shtick than anybody else, because addiction, boy, that'll really send it going. And then rise of dopamine culture, slow traditional culture, fast modern culture, dopamine culture, TV films, to videos, to reel of short videos, albums to track, to TikToks. I remember when I first met, I met a girl who was, we were listening, we were past iPods, we're now into smartphones, and she would tend to listen to like the first 30 seconds of a song and then go ahead to the next one. And then not too long ago, I saw on YouTube Music, that was actually a feature. You can tell YouTube Music to do that for you on your app, to just play like 20 or 30 seconds of the song, and then off to the next one, then off to the next one, then off to the next one, because each new song has a dopamine hit, and you're not even absorbing any of these. And then he basically gets down to Dr. Len Lance, who's basically saying, yeah, this is the death of culture. That people, my patient Sophie, a Stanford undergrad from South Korea, came in seeking help for depression and anxiety. Among other things we talked about, she told me she spends most of her waking hours plugged into some kinds of device, Instagramming, YouTubing, listening to podcasts or playlists. I suggested that she basically get off that stuff. And she looked at me incredulous and afraid. Why would I do that? I don't know. You want to have a life again? And then we get all the way to this guy.
Can feel that nipping at the edges, including people like Richard Dawkins.
I didn't mean Peterson, I mean Russell Brand. Because Brand, he ran the whole thing. And I wrote a piece for Voices this morning, basically thinking that on the other side of this complete meltdown, I can understand why people are going to go to church in the future. And it's going to have to be quiet. And it's going to have to be predictable. And it's going to have to be face-to-face. And it's going to have to be sane. And it's going to have to be slow. And it's going to have to be reliable. And it's going to have to be credible.
I may say that when you reach immediately for pride as your example of hedonism, you do yourself no favours, in my humble opinion, sir, because you could just as easily use an example of hedonism and indulgence that doesn't have such overt and explicit connotations when it comes to a particular expression of human sexuality. That's just...
So Brand is trying to edit Peterson's speech. It's like, please, did you not pay any attention to 2016? Jordan's going to forgive him.
Just one point, let me go on for ages, if you don't mind.
And this is where Brand really gets into preacher mode. Let me go on for ages, if you don't mind.
Now, I am aware, of course, of... I've lived hedonistically. I've been a drug addict. I've lived indulgently for long periods of time. So I understand the nature of that power and in practice how it may as well be a god, and how you conceptualize that could be pantheistically. You could see it as Aphrodite or as Venus. You could see yourself as being devoured by Cupid, and certainly.
Okay, so now we are pulling the gods in, and we're understanding the gods in a modern frame. Now we're doing some demythologizing, but we are definitely making connections.
By eros and making yourself the subject of such high humours.
Priapus, man. Priapus.
Priapus, indeed, indeed. But I saw some things in what you were saying that struck me as important. That when you were saying that, of course, when we default to making the self our deity, the sovereign being that which is currently charged, whichever instinct is at the wheel, whichever instinct is in the driving seat, that will become sovereign at that moment. If you have no recourse against that, if you have no principle, if you have no path, if you have no Tao, if you have no Christ, if you have no way of breathing and living God into being, then you...
Now remember, he's been reading Lewis, so the Tao comment should be contextualized probably with Lewis. But now he's sort of getting into preaching mode. And see, what's interesting is because Brand, up until the baptism, has tended to be a sort of indulge in this human divinity thing that you hear in a lot of New Age. And the real difficulty with the human divinity thing is we make really bad gods. And for exactly what he said, he just made the same point as Jonathan Pageau and Father Damick, that, in the moment, you need a container. You need something to hold you. And so again, I think we're going to see, I think it's part of what was behind Dreer's Benedict option, that you're going to need relational relationships all around you. And if you have, for some reason, gone into life and blown that up, you're going to need to build it anew. Now, if you're fortunate to not have blown it up, that you've had good formation, then you actually have a hope of constructing, having yourself constructed by your community, by your church, by your relationships around you.